On a cold April evening in 1912, beneath a sky so clear it seemed carved from glass, the most magnificent ship ever built slid silently into darkness. Men who believed they had conquered the ocean stood frozen as icy water crept across polished floors. Women in silk gowns clutched children under a sky ablaze with indifferent stars. And somewhere in the black Atlantic, history shifted forever. This is the true story of the RMS Titanic, not just how it sank, but how it changed the modern world. A floating palace is born. At the dawn of the 20th century, the world was obsessed with speed, luxury, and industrial dominance. The British shipping company White Star Line wanted to build something that would not merely cross the Atlantic, but redefine it. In Belfast, thousands of workers labored in deafening shipyards to create a vessel unlike any before it. The Titanic stretched over 882 feet long, nearly the length of 3 football fields, and rose like a steel cathedral from the docks. It was a marvel of engineering. 16 watertight compartments, massive steam engines, electric elevators, Turkish baths, a grand staircase, and dining halls that rivaled Europe's finest hotels. The ship's designer, Thomas Andrews, walked for decks with quiet pride. He believed in her design. Most did. The press called her unsinkable. It was a dangerous word. Departure from Southampton. On April 10, 1912, crowds gathered in Southampton to witness the departure. First-class passengers included millionaires, industrialists, and social elites. Among them were American tycoon John Jacob Astor IV and other prominent figures bound for opportunity in the United States. Below deck, third-class passengers, immigrants from Ireland, Scandinavia, and Eastern Europe, carried everything they owned in small trunks. They were chasing the American dream. For many, New York represented hope reborn. As the Titanic's massive propellers churned the harbor waters, few noticed how close the ship came to disaster immediately. The suction nearly pulled another vessel into collision. It was an omen no one understood at the time. The ship stopped briefly in France and Ireland before heading west into the vast, freezing expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. Ahead lay 2,000 miles of open sea. Life on board. For 4 days, life aboard Titanic was dazzling. First-class passengers dined beneath glittering chandeliers. The orchestra played ragtime and waltzes. Ladies wore evening gowns adorned with pearls. Gentlemen smoked cigars in velvet-upholstered lounges. In third class, families gathered in shared cabins, singing folk songs in many languages. Though modest, conditions were better than most ships of the era. Spirits were high. Captain Edward Smith, a veteran nearing retirement, commanded the bridge. This was to be his final voyage, a triumphant farewell. Wireless operators received multiple iceberg warnings from other ships during April 14th. The messages noted heavy ice fields drifting unusually far south. But the sea that evening was calm, eerily calm. No wind, no waves breaking against ice, and that calmness hid danger. The collision. At 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, lookout Frederick Fleet spotted something directly ahead. "Iceberg, right ahead!" The warning bell rang, orders were shouted, the engines reversed. But physics does not yield easily. The Titanic turned, not enough. The iceberg scraped along the starboard side, opening her hull like a can opener across multiple compartments. It was not a dramatic crash. Many passengers barely felt it. Ice fragments fell onto the forward deck like strange diamonds. Below deck, seawater poured in. Thomas Andrews quickly inspected the damage. His face reportedly turned pale. "She will sink," he told Captain Smith quietly. "It is a mathematical certainty." The ship could survive 4 flooded compartments. 6 were already filling. She had about 2 hours. Women and children first. Lifeboats were uncovered. Here lay another tragic flaw. There were only enough boats for about half the passengers. Why? Because regulations were outdated. They were based on ship tonnage, not passenger capacity. Titanic exceeded previous ship sizes dramatically, but safety laws had not kept pace. At 12:15 a.m., distress signals were sent. CQD, then SOS, one of the first major uses of the new signal. The closest responding ship was the RMS Carpathia, nearly 60 miles away. On deck, confusion grew. Many first-class passengers hesitated to board lifeboats. The ship felt safe. The band continued playing to calm nerves. Third-class passengers struggled to navigate complex corridors. Language barriers slowed evacuation. As lifeboats lowered, many were half empty. The ship's bow dipped lower. Water swallowed the mailroom. Then the grand staircase began to flood. The tilt increased sharply around 2 a.m. People realized the unimaginable was happening. The final moments. At 2:17 a.m., the orchestra reportedly played one final hymn. Lights flickered, then darkness. The Titanic broke apart, a detail unknown for decades until her wreck was discovered in 1985. At 2:20 a.m., she vanished beneath the surface. More than 1,500 people died in the freezing Atlantic waters. Hypothermia claimed most within minutes. Screams echoed across the ocean, then faded into terrible silence. Dawn and aftermath. At 4 a.m., the Carpathia arrived, rescuing more than 700 survivors. When they reached New York City days later, crowds waited in shock and grief. The world demanded answers. Investigations in the United States and Britain revealed systemic failures, insufficient lifeboats, ignored warnings, overconfidence, outdated regulations. The disaster transformed maritime law. Continuous radio monitoring became mandatory. Lifeboat requirements were overhauled. The International Ice Patrol was established to monitor iceberg dangers in the North Atlantic. The tragedy reshaped safety standards worldwide. Why Titanic still haunts us. Titanic endures not just because it sank, but because it represented human certainty and human vulnerability. It was a story of wealth and poverty sharing the same fate, of courage and cowardice, of innovation colliding with nature. And beneath 2 miles of dark ocean, her steel bones still rest, a monument to ambition and humility.
Part 2. Voices from the Freezing Dark. When dawn broke over the North Atlantic on April 15, 1912, the ocean looked deceptively peaceful. The sun rose over scattered lifeboats, drifting in cold silence. Survivors huddled together under thin blankets, staring at the empty stretch of water where the greatest ship in the world had vanished just hours earlier. What followed would shape modern America in ways few could have imagined. The ship that answered the call. The captain of the RMS Carpathia, Arthur Rostron, had pushed his vessel beyond normal limits through ice fields after receiving Titanic's distress call. His engineers shut down heating systems to divert every ounce of steam power to the engines. Lookouts were doubled. Extra lifeboats were readied. Blankets, coffee, and medical stations were prepared before they even reached the scene. At 4:10 a.m., the first lifeboat was spotted. One by one, survivors were pulled aboard. Some wept uncontrollably. Others sat in stunned silence. Many asked the same question: where is the Titanic? There was no easy answer. The human stories behind the headlines. Among the rescued was 22-year-old wireless operator Harold Bride. Exhausted and frostbitten, he had stayed at his post, sending distress signals until power failed. He would later testify that the new SOS signal, rarely used at the time, may have helped save hundreds. In another lifeboat sat socialite Margaret Brown, later nicknamed the Unsinkable Molly Brown. She had insisted her lifeboat return to search for survivors, arguing fiercely with the crew. Though they ultimately did not go back into the debris field, her courage became legendary in American lore. Then there were the stories less often told. Immigrant families separated in chaos, crew members who gave up their life jackets, engineers who remained below deck to keep the lights on until the final minutes. The Titanic was not just a disaster of steel and ice, it was a mosaic of human choices. America demands answers. When the Carpathia docked in New York City on April 18, 1912, nearly 40,000 people gathered in rain and fog. Reporters shouted questions. Families searched desperately for names on survivor lists. Within days, the United States Senate launched an official inquiry. Senator William Alden Smith led aggressive hearings, questioning surviving officers and crew. Captain Edward Smith had gone down with his ship, so others had to answer in his place. Why were there not enough lifeboats? Why were iceberg warnings not taken more seriously? Why did a nearby ship fail to respond? One of the most controversial aspects involved the SS Californian, which had reportedly been closer to Titanic than the Carpathia. Its wireless operator had gone to bed shortly before Titanic struck the iceberg. Rockets were seen in the distance, but were misinterpreted. Had Californian responded immediately, hundreds more might have survived. The hearings gripped America. Newspapers published daily transcripts. Public trust in unsinkable technology was shaken. The British inquiry and global shock. Across the Atlantic, Britain conducted its own investigation. The findings acknowledged design flaws, but stopped short of blaming the White Star Line too harshly. Yet the damage to reputation was done. Confidence in industrial infallibility, a hallmark of the early 1900s, was fractured. Titanic became a symbol of overconfidence during an era that believed technology had conquered nature. Just 2 years later, World War I would shatter that illusion even further. The aftermath: new laws for a new century. The Titanic disaster led directly to sweeping reforms. In 1914, the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea was established. It required enough lifeboats for all passengers, 24-hour radio monitoring, regular lifeboat drills, improved watertight compartment standards. The International Ice Patrol was also created to monitor iceberg dangers in the North Atlantic shipping lanes, a service that still operates today. In many ways, modern maritime safety was born from Titanic's failure. The lost ship beneath the sea. For decades, Titanic's final resting place remained unknown. The ocean where she sank is over 12,000 feet deep, nearly 2.5 miles beneath the surface. Many believed she would never be found. Then, in 1985, a joint American-French expedition led by oceanographer Robert Ballard located the wreck using deep-sea submersible technology. The discovery stunned the world. The ship lay in 2 major sections, confirming survivors' accounts that Titanic had broken apart before sinking, something previously debated for over 70 years. Images of rust-covered railings, the grand staircase void, and personal artifacts scattered across the seabed brought the tragedy back into public consciousness. Titanic was no longer just a story. It was real, visible, haunting. Hollywood and the American memory. In 1997, filmmaker James Cameron released the blockbuster film Titanic. The movie became a cultural phenomenon, winning 11 Academy Awards and introducing a new generation to the disaster. Though fictional characters drove the romance, the historical details were meticulously researched. Cameron even visited the wreck site himself multiple times. For millions in the United States, Titanic became more than history. It became emotional memory. Why the story endures. The Titanic resonates deeply in American culture because it represents something universal: the promise of progress, the illusion of control, the randomness of fate, the courage of ordinary people. First-class millionaires and third-class immigrants faced the same freezing water. Wealth could not buy survival once the laws of physics took over. And that is perhaps why the story refuses to fade. The wreck still rests in darkness, slowly being consumed by iron-eating bacteria. Experts believe it may collapse entirely within decades. When it does, the physical monument may disappear. But the story never will.